Hello, World Singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is Cosmere Conversations. Hello, all of you lovely listeners. We are back again. So excited about Wind and Truth. There have been some announcements going on in the real world regarding all of the events, the lead up. All of those things are starting to happen for Dragonsteel Nexus in December and the planned release. But here on the podcast, we're starting a little bit of a mini-series, a timeline series, a time warping series.
Not time warping.
Never time traveling in the Cosmere. This is one aspect of my personality that nobody needs to be exposed to.
That is true.
Because time travel Tyler stays within his little box and never comes over to the Cosmere conversations.
Thank goodness.
Because this time we're looking at the timeline of the prologue.
Yeah, all of the events that sort of lead up to Gavilar's assassination and how we got there, what all went into that specific event, which of course kicks off all of the events that we then read about in the Stormlight Archive. These are mostly told through flashbacks and, like you said, in the prologues from individual characters' perspectives. So this was really helpful for me to put together all of those things and get a full picture and a timeline of exactly what is happening when and how all of those things relate to each other.
And we're going to try to put in sequential order a lot of what is happening in the lead up as well as the night of the feast. And hopefully that serves as a good reminder where you don't have to go to multiple sources, multiple books and try to remember, what is said here because that actually happens later. And that type of confusion when it's from individual character perspectives on events.
Yeah.
We're going to try to have one episode where you can just refer to and understand everything that was going on in the prologues leading up to Wind and Truth, but not including Wind and Truth.
Correct. Yes, we should say this will not include the prologue for Wind and Truth, which is available, but as previously mentioned, we do not typically read those things until the actual book comes out. So this will not include that. This will just be Way of Kings through Rhythm of War. And this is going to kick off a series of episodes that are kind of our way of doing a reread series. We're not actually going to be doing a reread series, but we do have reread episodes in the back catalog, so you're welcome to check those out. This year, we are going to do these sort of timeline episodes where we're going to track different characters, specific character arcs through all 4 books as a way of catching up, making sure that we remember what all this character has been through in preparation for Wind and Truth.
And before we go forward, I want us to revisit the Unmade episode that we did last time. So much good feedback, a bunch of fun conversations going on the Patreon and the Discord. If you would like to join in on those, you are welcome to come on over to the Patreon at any time. We wanted to address an aspect that we talked about during the episode and maybe put too much emphasis on, and that was this concept of Spren and communication, specifically with their Radiant.
Yeah, the non-verbal Spren Radiant communication definitely does happen outside of Renarin. There are many examples of it throughout the books. On my reread, I am noticing it. So I think that is much less of a flag for Renarin's specific situation than we discussed in our last episode.
And I want to refocus slightly. What we should have been talking about a little bit more or putting more emphasis on in that moment rather than the communication aspect was a little bit of strangeness that Gliss will hide out inside of Renarin. Mm-hmm. And one of our patron listeners mentioned that maybe it's because Gliss is closer to Odium, which is now more associated with the Singers and the Fused, who have gem hearts and kind of Gliss is, or Renarin is, a little bit closer to a singer, and kind of that existing inside or within is what bonds them more than the nonverbal communication part.
Right. And I think the patron was sort of saying maybe this is an example of like evolution of the humans being on Roshar for so long that they are sort of taking on characteristics of the native people, which is an interesting thought.
And I still like the idea that we should look more closely at those enlightened spren as maybe a value add rather than a value subtract.
Yeah. Okay. With that out of the way, let's get into this timeline of events that culminate in Gavilar's assassination.
Now, just to be fun, can we Tarantino this? Can I start with our end date? Because that will put us in context leading up to Wind and Truth. We know that the contest of champions happens in the Rosharan year 1175. 1175. That's the contest of champion, and that's the time period we're going into. Now, let's go back.
Yeah, zooming out, just to give a little bit of context to some of these events. In 1145, that is when Gavilar and Dalinar succeed in unifying Alethkar. So that's sort of the beginning of Gavilar's rule in Alethkar. A couple decades later, 1163, is when Dalinar burns Ralthalis and kills Evie, his wife, R.I.P. Around this same time, so basically from
the unification
until 1166, Gavilar starts reading The Way of Kings and trying to forge his path now as a king and a leader, and sort of changing his identity a little bit from conqueror to king. He is seen during this time as losing his thirst for battle, which is the thing that the sort of catalyst that eventually brings him and Dalinar out to the Shattered Plains. It's an attempt from Dalinar to reignite the thirst for battle in his brother by going to fight a chasm fiend.
Yeah, and I think this time period in between the unification and the return to the rift and the burning of Rathalos is important and significant for a fashion icon. Dalinar remarks that this is when Gavilar grows that beard and is looking all regal with his bearded up face.
Yeah.
I think that obviously anyone with a beard going to get a thumbs up on leadership for me. And
for our listeners who can't see you, Tyler has a beard.
Well, yeah. It's just a cousinly bond, like a Herdasian type of thing. Always going to trust him a little bit more. However, what we know about the way Gavilar moves to kind of adopt these responsibilities, it is a long process happening over a decades, and it's going on even during the time of the conquest and the battles. And then it accelerates and kind of speeds up where he's shifting towards this version of the Wise King Gavilar. Debatable if the man ever gets to the Wise King status, but he's at least trying to move in that direction.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if we know what his reasonings are, what his like underlying desire is from reading The Way of Kings and gathering the knowledge that he's gathering. It certainly doesn't seem to make him a very good person from what we see, which we'll get to a little bit later on. It could just be that he is hungry for power or obsessed with his legacy and like preserving what he's made so far. So I don't want to necessarily say that he's like on a path for betterment, because I don't think we know that, but he is interested in The Way of Kings and is accumulating information.
And it's part of that interest or that intrigue that Dalinar is able to use to encourage him to go out on the hunts and like move towards the Shattered Plains, because it is a kind of like an unknown land for exploration. Very similar to what we see from Eshonai in the reverse. Like she wants to go outside of her homeland and kind of explore. Gavilar is, being re-encouraged to live up to some of the glory days of the past. But it really is just kind of the same thing that sends them both on the path to interact with one another.
Yeah, and 1166 is when Eshonai and Gavilar and Dalinar all meet. And the discovery of the Parshendi, aka the listeners, happens. And these two cultures that have not previously met suddenly are interacting and getting to know each other. And Gavilar at first is described as not really caring about them. His scholars are kind of interested, but he's kind of like, whatever, cool, parchment that can think. Until he sees a couple of things. He sees some of their artifacts that look to be very old, and he hears about their songs and the knowledge that they have of their past and their connection to the past. And then he gets really intrigued and he wants to know everything that they know about that old time and what they know about potentially the heralds and the Knights Radiant, etc., and sort of what the world was like in the Shadow Days. And that's what leads him to negotiate the treaty with the listeners.
Yeah, so it's like the listeners unlocked something in his mind that developed to an obsession or nearing an obsession that was based on this exploratory period. When he's reading old books, he had to be learning something about the Knights Radiant, or he's trying to kind of get knowledge in one way and it's coming in bits and pieces, maybe from Ardents and whatnot. But then there is a connection made with the Parshendi, the listeners, and that kind of like solidifies everything in his mind. Oh, actually, a little bit like what's going on Canticle. There's energy, there's some type of weird source, and then the thing in the middle, the spark, is really what is magnifying his desires. And it really does go to the next level, because then he very much seems like he has a purpose moving forward. And that purpose is defined, we know, in part by the desire to encourage the listener gods to return, which they're not going to be happy about.
Yeah. During this first meeting with Gavilar, Dalinar, and the Parshendi, we meet a Feruchemist world hopper, Axendweth, who is a part of Gavilar's retinue. Maybe she really is, but maybe she's posing as a surgeon's assistant, and she's very interested in Venli and Eshonai. She meets with both of them individually and asks them questions about if they've seen any strange spren, if they've seen spren that are acting like people. So it kind of seems like she is trying to ascertain whether a new desolation is on the horizon. She seems to know quite a lot about Roshar's past and present. Of course, eventually she gives Venli a gemstone that has a void spren in it, and that void spren is Ulam, who we'll also talk about a bit more later.
Yeah, big bummer Ulam.
Yeah.
I find any world hopper to, of course, be of interest and wondering mostly, how does she know things that people on Roshar don't know? That is what is confusing to me, because Yasna is said to be devoted her recent life before Way of Kings to this study, to trying to learn about the Voidbringers and she can barely get nursery rhymes. Like, she's going to like children's books as references.
Yeah, but where on the timeline, as far as we know, is Mistborn Era 1 in relation to Roshar?
What we know for sure is that there is communication in the epigraphs between Hoid and Harmony. And during that letter, Harmony says, I need something for myself, perhaps a sword or something along those lines. So that puts Mistborn Era 2 in his future, or something he's in the process of developing wax for
Era 2
Oathbringer, basically.
Is like after Stormlight 5.
It would be in the weird period of 300 years where there are no Mistborn stories. Mistborn Era 1 is far in the past to Way of Kings. Not far in terms of Roshar.
It would only be 300 years.
Max.
Yeah.
And then you have the amount of time between Way of Kings starting and Oathbringer. That gap, sometime a letter is written by Harmony, and he's saying Mistborn Era 2 is about to happen.
So, okay, because my thought was perhaps some of the Feruchemists have been world hoppers for a while, and then this knowledge is being passed down in copper mines. And so
That
that's
would
how
be really interesting.
Axendweth would have access to information from a long time ago. It was gathered a long time ago, but she has it in a way that Jasnah wouldn't have access to. I don't know if that quite lines up unless Feruchemist from Scadrial were world hopping, a really long time ago. But something to think about anyway.
It is a good call to think about, and remember the namesake that we have for all of the listeners of World Singers. There's the other side of that coin, the World Bringers, which are just two branches of people serving similar roles on Roshar and Scadrial, respectively.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you imagine them coming from the same source in the distant past, let's call them like Yolen world beginners, the source.
Sure.
And then they branch off to go to Roshar and Scadrial. There may be communication between those two groups before it is eliminated in Roshar's past at some point. And that is where the information would really make sense to be kept in a copper mine on Scadrial. If someone from Roshar went over and told them the story and they recorded it, and then that's given in the far future to Axendweth, and she knows something about Roshar's past that they themselves don't know.
Right.
I can't imagine she learned it on Roshar if Jasnah couldn't do it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, I think most of what Axendweth knows, including the listener language that she's using to communicate with Eshonai and Venli, is coming from copper mines.
To me, that's a huge revelation about world hopping in the past.
Yeah.
And the power of copper mines compared to what exists on Roshar. They've lost so many desolations and the information is lost and thousands, but somehow Axendweth has a language that she's able to communicate with modern listeners. I mean, this is important.
I guess she's probably using connection for the language.
That
she's probably
does
not
line
actually,
up.
Yeah. That makes more sense.
But to have this knowledge is important and significant.
Right. And I find even more interestingly, she not only knows all of this, but she seems to have a vested interest in whether or not there's a desolation. Like, she clearly has taken a side. And I'm just so curious about how that came about, why this Feruchemist is seemingly on the side of odium in this conflict. So many questions about how this happened.
Yeah, listeners, let us know if you know of any connection between Scadrial and Roshar that would have existed pre-Mistborn Era 1. If there is some type of word of Brandon or any type of tidbit from the text that indicates the Well of Ascension or maybe some aspect of preservation is serving as a way to transit. We know that Hoid can do that later, but he's always a weird, shrug your shoulders if Hoid is doing it. I don't know if that means other people could do it, but it seems like, there has to be something there. So listeners, let us know if you happen to have that tidbit of information about the far past communication between Roshar and Scadrial.
This brings us to Gavilar's death in 1167, the 9th month. Of course, we have the feast. So there's this treaty that has been signed, and the listeners and the humans want to celebrate this new treaty that's been made between their two people. And boy, a lot happens before, during, and after this feast. So, beginning our timeline, I think earliest thing on the timeline that we have evidence for is that our good friend Shalash destroys some depictions of herself in the Kholinar Palace. So she has entered the palace at some point before this feast and done her work of destroying the art of herself.
And if you want some more fun theories about Shalash and perhaps her namesake, go check out a couple of episodes ago with the Heralds, because I think there's lots of fun stuff to speculate, but we can't do that now because we have a tight timeline to stick to.
Next on our timeline of the feast, we have Venli, who is sneaking around the Kholinar Palace. She's there with the listeners who are sort of setting up, getting ready for the feast. She breaks away with her Voidspren Ulam, and they are specifically on a mission to look for a bag of Voidspren gemstones that Axendwith has left in the palace so that Venli can take them back to her scholars and create more listeners like her who have these Voidspren. However, when they find the hiding place for the gemstones, all they find is a note from Axendwith saying that she's been discovered by another Feruchemist who is an agent working for a different entity. I think that it's likely that this other Feruchemist is the palace steward who is mentioned in one of the prologues to wear too much jewelry, which is always my indication that it might be a Feruchemist. And that agent, probably the steward, turned Gavilar against Axendwith. So Axendwith has had to flee the planet, and she's no longer there.
I don't know how much more I can speculate on this, but now there's multiple factions of Feruchemist.
Yeah.
This sounds like far future Cosmere stuff that we have got in Scadrial or like
you
the
think
Night
they're
Brigade.
Time traveling?
No, not at all.
Oh.
But that's what it sounds like. It sounds like the...
Just like the world is much more connected than maybe we
realized.
Yeah,
like what
yeah.
we were expecting in the far future is actually happening in the past. And...
and the present.
Well, yes, the present, depending on your place in space-time, we are moving all the way through, but it is great to be able to see these types of distinctions. That gemstone bag, though, filled with Voidspren, is eventually recovered by Venli, right? She's able to take that back?
I believe so.
Okay, cool.
While they are looking for the gemstones, reading this note, Venli is apprehended by the palace security. Ulam has been distracted by discovering that the heralds are here with them as well. And so he's sort of wandered off. Venli gets apprehended. Nail notices Ulam, and then he follows Ulam to Venli's location. Around the same time, Gavilar is meeting with Kalak and Nail. He seems to be telling them that he has figured out how to transport invested entities to and from Braize by using a box that is similar to the ones that we see later used for Scions.
From the text, we have this, quote, "Being able to bring them back and forth from Braize doesn't mean anything," one said. "It's too close to be a relevant distance. It was impossible only a few short years ago," said a deep, powerful voice. Gavilar, "This is proof. The connection is not severed, and the box allows for travel. Not yet as far as you'd like, but we must start the journey somewhere," end quote. And I would remind us that one of Kalak's driving forces is to get off of Roshar.
Yes. And so he has partnered with Gavilar. Gavilar has somehow accumulated a lot of information, right? He knows about Braize. He knows about invested entities. He knows about these boxes. He knows about capital C connection. I don't know if we for sure have a line on where exactly he has gotten all of this information, but clearly he knows a lot. Do you have any concept of what he's trying to do other than help the heralds?
Do I have guesses? Yes. Do I have speculation? Yes. I think that a force like Thydakar is not where we see him at the end of Mistborn Era 2, but he is around. He's out there. And we can expect the Ghostbloods receiving pressure from Thydakar, encouraging some kerfuffles and, information that maybe should not be known, getting to a person like Gavilar. But then what is Gavilar's motivation?
Yeah.
I don't have any type of great insight because it seems very cross-purposed in almost every respect. We learn piece of information A, and that contradicts the next thing we learn in information B. And they don't all seem to line up perfectly right now. And I can just never get a great handle on Gavilar, normally because he's shown from someone else's perspective.
Of course.
It's Dalinar commenting on how he views Gavilar rather than Gavilar speaking for himself.
But we do get several scenes directly with Gavilar, and this is one of them.
This is one of them,
So
and
this
it is
one
important.
of those opportunities to actually hear from Gavilar what he's doing and what he wants. Along with this discussion about the box and being able to transport things to and from Braize, he has several gemstones with him, quote, including several that seemed strangely off. They glowed with an inverse of light, as if they were little pits of violet darkness, sucking in the color around them, end quote. So seemingly he has anti-voidlight gemstones. Navani is the person who is seeing this. She has discovered Gavilar's meeting with the heralds and she's spying on him a little bit. Gavilar eventually sees Navani and has a big confrontation with her, saying, quote, I have discovered the entrance to the realm of gods and legends, and once I join them, my kingdom will never end. I will never end, end quote. What do you think that means?
Okay, so this is where a lot of our recency bias is going to come into play, because I'm still obsessed with the heralds from our conversation. I'm still obsessed with the unmade from our last conversation. And to me, I can't get out of my head how you were speaking about Ishar and his megalomania. To me, that's what this strikes of or smells of.
Yeah.
Gavilar is becoming more and more megalomaniac. He's talking about, I will never end. Anytime someone wants to never end, and even if they want their legacy to never, like Tywin Lannister, the family will never end.
Yeah.
That stuff is bad. I don't like it. I avoid those types of mindsets in myself personally, or if people were to espouse them too much, I would want to go away from those people, because they're going to do something bad, because everything ends. And so you're going to fight the thing that you cannot win against. And normally that results in terrible collisions, like Stormlight and anti-voidlight crashing together.
It certainly does bring to mind that maybe he's trying to become a herald. The first thing that's coming to my mind is maybe Kalak has said, I want out.
And Gavilar wants to step in?
Yeah, like maybe they're trying to find a way to transfer Kalak's part of the Oath Pact to Gavilar.
That would be, in my mind, something that does line up and give enough motivation to Gavilar to basically, quote unquote, do anything that would serve that purpose.
Yeah.
Because it's lots of air quotes going around right now. Noble, in a sense that he is recognizing maybe the downside of the heralds. He knows these heralds are around these 9. Taln is suffering. If I can go and help Taln and take Kalak's place.
I don't know if that's necessarily what he's
no, but that would be like the best possible version, right?
Yeah,
if we're
sure.
trying to give him the strongest argument and motivation, the most noble cause possible, but also makes him say this, I will never end, my kingdom will never end. Why will you never end, and why will your kingdom ever? Because you will be a herald.
Because he'll be a herald,
exactly. And that can be, really, really bad in the way that we see Ishar suffering more and more from megalomania. Perhaps that vibe is already rubbing off on Gavilar.
It's interesting because Gavilar is presumably part of the Sons of Honor, who are trying to bring back the heralds, bring back the Knights Radiant, and sort of restore honor and glory to humans. They think that if they bring about a desolation, that will also bring back the heralds and the Knights Radiant. So that's sort of the thesis of the Sons of Honor. But Gavilar clearly knows that the heralds are here. He is not trying to bring them back because they're already here and he knows it. So he has some other ulterior motive that is not espoused or not known by the rest of the Sons of Honor.
I think this is one of the great mysteries, and it may be immediately answered upon reading Wind and Truth, or it may be something that plays out over the back half of the Stormlight Archive. What I find interesting on this feast day is Gavilar's seeming legitimate excitement about the listeners and how they act as this source of knowledge from the past, this window, this glimpse into the past. He's seemingly truly invested in learning from the listeners, and he meets with Eshonai to discuss this, telling Eshonai that the humans have learned how to trap Spren in gemstones to make fabrials. and that there's a similarity between that and the listener gem hearts. He also states that he thinks he can bring back the listener gods with the right gemstones. That conversation is going to trigger the warning bells to Eshonai, who, while Gavilar doesn't know this, he's like confused. The listeners are the people who rejected the gods.
Right, yes.
And so he thinks that they are somehow connected to what we call the Parshmen, but that's like that group is who he thinks he's talking to.
Well, I think he just assumes that they feel the same way that he feels, right? Like he's projecting onto them thinking, well, we want our gods to come back. Like we want the heralds and the knights radiant to come back. It would be so great to have these beings of power. Obviously, he doesn't know anything about the actual history. That's what he's trying to discover. And so he just assumes that the Parshendi will feel the same way, that they also are thinking, wow, I wish we had these powerful beings back in our lives. So he thinks he is doing them a favor. I think truly, I don't think that this is sarcasm or malice in any way. It's quite simply an honest proclamation that he thinks that they will be happy to hear that he'll be able to bring their gods back.
For any future conquest that you might be interested in, I would advise learning about the people enough so that you can know if they are in favor of their gods or not in favor of their gods.
Yeah, it is.
Seemingly, that's like step one in the conquest of a people.
Turns out to be a big error on his part since, they assassinate him.
They assassinate him. They start a long war between their people that results in almost all of them dying. It is just an absolute colossal misunderstanding of the audience that he is speaking to. And that is why it always feels, as we get more information, are there going to be some, originally I would say like Teravangian-esque puppet masters above, like working all of the different sides together. This feels like it would need to be even larger, an Odium-esque movement of the pieces around, because it's just like, it's too convenient. And in an Odium respect, all you have to do is just like encourage the passion of Gavilar. You just have to say, yeah, man, you're doing it right. You riot him up a little bit and he's all excited and jazzed.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how much power Odium has on the planet at this point, which is maybe not very much.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
He certainly shouldn't have as much power as, say, cultivation or honor at the prime. But I think it's fair to say if Ruin had influence on the planet while he was quote unquote imprisoned, then Odium should have some type of influence. Maybe not identical, but some type.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We also get a little peek into Gavilar's motivations here. He says that he needs to, quote, unite them and that only a threat will unite them. He also says that he wants to ensure that his legacy of a unified Alethkar will outlive him. So that sort of sounds like maybe what he was talking about when he said, my kingdom will never end, I will never end. That he is talking about like his legacy and this unified Alethkar kingdom. I think that there's another layer, though. I think that's part of what he wants, but I do think that there is an extra layer to his desire for kind of preservation or longevity in this way.
I'd agree. He also discovers or has knowledge of the Parshman forms, and specifically that the Parshmen that the people use as slaves have been stripped of their forms that the Parshendi are displaying.
Right. So he like knows about the false desolation.
Maybe not that much, certainly not as much as we discussed in our last episode, but I think he has this concept of stripped of their forms.
He says he knows how that happened, though, by like a spread being trapped in a gemstone.
Okay, yeah.
That's kind of like how he's on this whole scholarly kick, right? He already told Eshonai, we figured out how to trap things in gemstones. We think that's going to help us with your gods. I know that had, something to do with the Parshmen losing their forms. And I know how to reverse that.
This guy has like 9/10 of the puzzle already built for him.
I mean,
and he can't put the last couple of pieces in. He's swinging and missing so bad.
I'm curious how much he's being manipulated by Kalak and Nail. Presumably, this is where he got that information, right? Both Kalak and Nail are the heralds who were present
Yes, and we
at
talked
the
about
imprisonment of Ba-Edo Mishram. So I'm guessing they told him this information to try to get him on this path for their own purposes.
And again, Yasna is said to be one of the preeminent scholars on the planet.
Yeah.
And she can't find any of this information.
Right.
So it can't just be he had good researchers.
No.
It has to be something a little bit more magical or connected to the heralds. I don't know. I think what you're saying lines up perfectly. For some reason, Kalak and Nail are manipulating Gavilar in this way. And there is some type of desire that they have that would be served by what Gavilar is trying to do.
Yeah, which I don't know. Like, Nail's entire purpose basically is to prevent the desolations from happening again, which is why he's killing all the surge binders. So why would he be working with Gavilar, who says he's trying to like bring about the desolations? Sort of, maybe.
I don't know if this is accurate, but what if Nail is not trying to prevent the desolations? What if Nail is trying to kill surge binders? And so therefore...
I mean, that's not what he says his reasoning is.
But his actions are his reasoning, and he kills surge binders. And perhaps at this time he was convinced by Kalak, who has his own motivations, that this would create more surge binders for him to kill. And then he could permanently stop the desolations from coming.
I don't think that's right, but I appreciate your thoughts. I am intrigued by Gavilar's proclamations of unite them. In all of my rereads up until now, I missed this other meeting. Gavilar is really busy on the night of the feast. There is another meeting that is just alluded to in passing. I believe it's Eshonai who sees him meeting with 2 officers, 2 women in long dresses, and an old man in robes. I think that we can assume that this old man in robes is Taravangian, because Taravangian says that he has spoken to Gavilar on the night of the feast. And this is when Gavilar confides in Taravangian that he is receiving visions from the Stormfather. And he actually has taken this to be even more extreme than Dalinar eventually does. He takes this unite them to mean that the entire planet needs to be united.
Yeah, he gets to the point earlier where Dalinar arrives. Dalinar is first saying the High Princes need to be united against the Parshendi, and Gavilar already had the 2 chess moves ahead of that circumstance.
Absolutely. And then he also has looped Taravangian in, and when Taravangian ends up becoming king of Yakaved after all of the chaos that he has sown, he says that this is part of Gavilar's plan. Basically, that the 2 of them are going to, and who knows who else, but at least the 2 of them are going to work to consolidate various portions of the planet and then work together to be united against this cataclysm that they think is coming. I just keep wondering who else Gavilar has in on this whole scheme.
Yeah, it might have been Navani who created wrist watches, but Gavilar had a full Airtable calendar for this meeting. He had just a bunch of things lined up, ready to go, second by second. He's everywhere and meeting everyone. Let's go back to Eshonai, though, because there is an important handoff that happens between these 2.
In this meeting between Eshonai and Gavilar, he gives Eshonai a voidlight gemstone for her to take with her and sort of sends her on her way. Around this same time, Nail is meeting with Venli, and he questions her about how she has brought Voidspren back, how many are back, and she gets a little bit defensive. She uses a strategy, which is just tell the other person that it was their fault, and like most people believe it's their fault already, and so like they'll believe you, and it works. Nail says, quote, "Impossible. Nail repeated. Ishar said only a connection between the worlds could cause a bridge to open, and Taln has not given in. I would know if he had. So Gavilar's plan is working. The fool. He will destroy us all. Nail sneered, a sudden and unexpected burst of emotion. That foolish idiot of a man. He lures us with promises, then breaks them by seeking that which I told him was forbidden. Yes, I heard it tonight. The proof I need. I know. I have been vigilant, the man ranted, but not vigilant enough. I must take care. If the bonds start forming again, if we let the pathway open, end quote.
Okay, so he certainly doesn't seem to just want to kill Surgebinders.
Yes.
But I think that...
And he also seems to disagree with Gavilar, right? He's like, oh man, I freaking knew this guy was going to do something dumb and bring it all crashing down.
I think what is most important is the phrase from the beginning where he says, Ishar said only a connection between the worlds could cause a bridge to open, and Taln has not given in. I would know if he had, end quote. So there's a couple of important things there. Bridge can be opened by capital C connection. That happens when Taln or any herald dies and returns. So like they form a bridge as they are returning to Roshar. And Nail and conceivably the other heralds would all know the moment that happened.
Yeah.
Nail gives us this knowledge that I think is confirming the main way of transition from Braize to Roshar. But we previously discussed in the Heralds episode, what about alternative routes? Because Taln never broke, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there something going on with the Everstorm? Absolutely.
Well, yeah.
We know that for sure. But we believe very strongly that the Everstorm is not the first time that Voidspren or anything starts transitioning back and forth. And so now we have
not, because you have Ulam
already. So we know that Ulam exists. So the Everstorm is not the kicker. We know that Taln never breaks. That's not the kicker. Here we have another explanation. If Gavilar was able to form a bridge through Fabrials or through something, transitioning investiture or invested beings back and forth, perhaps that was enough of a bridge to, quote unquote, trigger a desolation.
No, I think it's got to be the same thing that brings Taln back to Roshar. Whatever happens, right? It's not Taln breaking, but something happens that brings Taln back. Whatever that was is the thing that makes the connection. That connection brings Taln back. That connection is allowing the Voidspren to get through, etc.
All great calls. Love it. Listener, you let us know what you think. What is the pathway back, the transition? Is it what Gavilar has done here with this small bridge? Is it a bigger bridge? You let us know what you think is going on here.
Then Nail tells Venli that Gavilar intends to betray the listeners. I think we can assume that he is talking about Gavilar's plan to return the listener gods as the betrayal. And then Nail is planning to kill Gavilar because of what he's heard. But he says it would take him a really long time to be able to do that because he has to get all of the legal paperwork and whatnot to be able to kill Gavilar. So instead of taking the long way, he basically puts it into the hands of the listeners. He tells Venli that there is a provision in their treaty that allows one party to attack the other if they find evidence of conspiracy against them. And he's like, here, I'm giving you the evidence of conspiracy. Now you can legally attack and kill Gavilar. Go do that. And then he also tells her specifically about Szeth, where to find him, and that he is using Yezrian's honor blade.
Really just the worst lawyer ever. Nail is not great. Don't like him. Not a fan. Come on, man. You don't tell your client exactly how they can break the contract, which will lead to their eventual downfall in a huge war.
But technically, they're just following the letter of the law. They're not breaking any rules. You're a windrunner.
Definitely. I'm just over here shaking my head. Just nay. That is not the honorable thing to do.
The law doesn't matter. Only your feelings do.
And not only your feelings, but, only honors feelings.
Then we've got both Eshonai and Venli who come back to their ruling body, the Five, and explain that Gavilar is trying to bring back their gods. Venli is able to tell the Five what Nail has said, and they decide to kill Gavilar and break the treaty because it is that important to them that their gods do not return. And so the listener Clade goes and buys Szeth, who is then their servant at the feast.
Real quick turnaround for everybody. You come to a feast to celebrate, you're all happy-go-lucky, and then a couple of heralds start mentioning a little, hey, desolations are coming, and then one king mistakes your group of listeners for harsh people who would definitely want the return of the gods. You have a slave like around the corner, like Szeth was just down at the local market, and they just walk on over, pick up the assassin in white, and then
I think
him
they
back.
Gave him the white clothes.
Oh, yeah. They want the show of it all. But this is why the feast is so interesting. It's because there's all of these little moments. Just how many moments does it take to get Szeth to that slave market on the night of the feast? What else is going on all around Roshar and the history? Taravangian has already had his super great day by the time we get to the feast, so we know he's already attempting to unravel the diagram and move everything into position. There's just an astounding amount happening, and then all the dominoes fall down on this night all at once.
Yeah, there's a lot going on at this feast. The feast begins, the revelry is in progress, and then we get to Jasna's portion of this evening. She makes her way out of sort of the main feasting hall, and she sees Gavilar talking in secret with Amaram. And then she meets with Lys. She's planning to ask her to assassinate Azadin, Elokar's wife, but instead she just asks Lys to keep an eye on her. And she visits Shadesmar for the first time and meets her spren, Ivory.
And while we don't think that's the first moment of Radiant-esque abilities, it certainly has to be a significant one to transition into Shadesmar.
Yeah, she said she has noticed her shadow going the wrong way a couple of times and is like, this is kind of weird. But this is the first time that she ever visits Shadesmar. And it certainly seems to be the first time she's ever seen Ivory.
And just because we're here in the moment, that assassin Lys should still be out there somewhere.
Yeah.
And
theoretically
doing their assassinating job.
It's also speculated that Lys may be one of the heralds.
Oh, I was thinking World Hopper, but
maybe a World
Herald
Hopper
is interesting as well.
We don't have any concrete details as to what or who Lys actually is, but the Herald theory is quite popular online.
Yeah, and it's definitely of note that Jasna changes her mind and basically says, I will pay you double, Lys, to protect Aesudan rather than assassinate her, because we know that there are going to be other assassins coming for the queen.
Then, of course, the finale, Szeth murders Gavilar on the instructions from the listeners. And Gavilar's first reaction is, quote, you can tell Thydakar that he's too late, end quote. And then his second guesses for who has perpetrated the assassination are Rasteris and then Sadius.
Fine guesses all around. I'm going to be honest. That is definitely within the realm of possibility for each of those three people.
But also, so seemingly Thydakar is trying to stop Gavilar from doing whatever he's doing, because he says you can tell Thydakar that he's too late. The work has already happened. I've already done it.
I could understand a breaking down in a partnership. Thydakar originally reaches out, shares some knowledge with Gavilar, and then Gavilar maybe unveils more or understands more and is going down this path that Thydakar doesn't want him to go down. And then Thydakar tries to stop him. But we have to remember, Thydakar is not leaving Scadrial at this point at all. This is just
but
in
obviously
communications.
The Ghost Bloods are on Roshar, and we have a lot of evidence that the Ghost Bloods and the Sons of Honor are in competition.
Definitely,
they're fighting
100%,
each other. Yeah. So seemingly Gavilar is the most connected to the Sons of Honor, and so I'm just curious what exactly his project is that is so interesting to so many different entities, why Thydakar would want to maybe stop it, etc. And then why Rasteris, aka Kalak, would be killing him. Maybe also because, like Nail said, he's sort of meddling in things that they have told him not to.
Yeah, I feel like there's cooperation among these groups. They're not all hating each other and like mortal enemies. Risteris and Nail, obviously, were just around Gavilar, so he's cooperating with them enough. Nail states that Gavilar is working counter to what Nail has instructed him to do.
Yeah.
Sadeas clearly is, one of the most trusted advisors in the kingdom or whatnot, longtime friend-ish. I don't think that any one of these people is a true enemy. They're just those who know about what is going on in some respect. I would be curious why he didn't think Amaram was also on that list of possibility. Maybe tricked by those sweet baby blue eyes of Amaram's or whatnot.
Amaram is the good guy, and
of course,
he's part of the Sons of Honor.
Maybe it's just that Gavilar thinks he's too lowly. He's like beneath him, and these other players are on his level. Thydakar, Risteris, Sadeas. And so they would be the ones who would most benefit from an assassination. He's wrong, right? Like all three of those people have nothing to do with it. It's Nail.
Well, I mean, yeah, Nail does have something to do with it.
But not Rosaris. Like Rosaris, we know and pick up with Kalak. Sorry for using the double names. But we pick up with Kalak in Rhythm of War, and he is talking about working kind of in cahoots with Thydakar on the Get Off Roshar planet. Mm-hmm. And so I'm confused. I'm left confused by this first reaction that Gavilar has. Maybe he's just been assassinated. Maybe I should cut him some slack. Like he's been stabbed, he's fallen.
His lifeblood is literally bleeding out.
Yeah, he had a huge fall, maybe a concussed, and he's a little confused. But he just goes Thydakar, Risteris, Sadeas. Those are the people I thought would assassinate me, and all of them are wrong.
Yeah. Then Gavilar leaves his message for Dalinar that puts him on the current path that we see Dalinar on throughout the Stormlight Archive of find the most important words a man can say. He then gives a anti-voidlight gemstone to Szeth, and he says, quote, "You must take this. They must not get it," end quote. Who is they in this circumstance? Who is he trying to hide the anti-voidlight gemstone from? Is it just like his family and the general public? Or do you think it's specifically Thydakar or Risteris or Nail?
It's so difficult to say because, okay, Thydakar, Ghostbloods, maybe. You don't want them to have it. He has to be getting his information from someone, though. Like, he is not the source of this. And I'm confused. The best example I have, the best possible people that can be instructing Gavilar are the heralds. So I don't think that Risteris or Nail are the people he wants this thing to be kept away from.
Yeah.
They're probably the ones who gave it to him.
Well, and all of those gemstones were like out on the table during his meeting with them.
Yeah, so I don't think it's them, which makes me think, why did you say Risteris at all? Just to confuse me? Or is this a Brandon thing? Brandon's doing this to me on purpose, aren't you?
Probably.
I'll ask him. He's a huge friend of the pod. But let's just take that one off the list. Sadeas, the other high princes, I could see that being a legitimate concern. Like, the people who will fight over my throne should not have this power. That kind of makes sense to me, especially if he knows what comes about when these two lights are interacting and the big explosions that are possible. I could see that just being like, but his family? I don't understand why he would be worried about.
I mean, I could
Navani
see
having it or
that
something.
you wouldn't want it to get out to the general public because it's such a powerful tool, that you don't want to just leave it lying around for people to play around with when they don't have all of the context and information that Gavilar has when he is doing his experiments.
But he gives it to Szeth, his assassin.
Yeah.
Who he believes was sent by the wrong people, or not the correct people. And
I think Szeth tells him who has sent him.
Okay, so he goes through the wrong guesses.
Yeah,
but he eventually. So you must take it. He's not worried about the listeners having it.
Right, because he already gave one to
Exactly.
Ashenai.
So like that is off the table. He wouldn't be worried about the Shin having it because he's giving it to a Shin guy. Like that. Like that's also off the table. I'm just trying to remove as many things as possible. Gavilar's not thinking about the they in this circumstance. And who we're left with are just kind of like weird groups, like not really explainable. I don't think it's the heralds. I don't think that it's necessarily his immediate family.
Maybe it's Thydakar?
Maybe it's Thydakar.
Yeah, the Ghost Bloods. He just doesn't want the Ghost Bloods to have it.
Yeah, because he's like, the first one I was worried about was Thydakar assassinating me. The assassin says no. Okay, but it's really important that Thydakar doesn't get this thing.
Right.
So take it away from me.
Yeah.
And then nobody will be able to show up like a vulture.
Right.
And kind of pick up my body and get this thing off of me.
Yeah.
That's as best as I got. That like he is very worried about Thydakar.
Yeah. I think that's the best guess that we can make at this point.
Thydakar's not that scary. Why are we so afraid of Thydakar at this moment? What has he demonstrated that would make Gavilar afraid of a guy a planet away?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's an interplanetary agent that's like meddling in your stuff.
I mean, he's definitely meddling in your business.
Yeah.
That's for sure. And the Ghostbloods are scary, and scary for a lot of reasons that are very valid reasons to be afraid of them. Like assassination, big problem. And if you know, like, the head of the major assassin group is Thydakar, sure, be afraid of them, I guess. That makes sense. But I am confused how Thydakar could have so much staying power on Roshar when he's definitely not on Roshar. Like, he is. But he
has a bunch of agents on Roshar.
I know, but what could they possibly?
They're gonna
be
kill
doing?
You.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
He was afraid of that, but then it turned out to be the guys he invited to the feast that he also didn't understand. That's all I'm left with. I'm left with confusion about the fear of Thydakar. Like, what is Thydakar's plans and operations on Roshar? And they're so sophisticated that they're terrifying Gavilar in every respect.
I guess we'll have to read and find out.
That time is coming up soon. Listeners, you let us know what you think about this final question. Who is the they that must not get the anti-voidlight gemstone? We've thrown out a lot of possible not options, things that you should not select, but you let us know what we should select. Who is the appropriate they in this circumstance? As you mentioned at the top, we are going to return to several timelines and kind of track people throughout their different major events. And hopefully that will give us multiple perspectives, all leading and ending with the beginning of Wind and Truth.
Until next time, life before death,
strength before weakness,
journey before destination.